Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Mark Graban, and we are joined today by Lauren Hisey. She's a continuous improvement coach and consultant. Lauren, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Mark?
Doing all right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. If you, I always try to let the guests just go ahead. If you can introduce yourself and tell the audience about your background to get things started.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Lauren Hisey. I guide businesses and our business owners and leaders to rapidly and efficiently get from point A to point B so they can see real results and feel empowered. I've been doing continuous improvement for 13 years. I coach, consult, been an internal consultant at AT&T and Nielsen, and I've also taught uh, Lean Six Sigma at Nielsen, and I also taught it at the University of South Florida down in Tampa.
And how I'm always curious, how and when did you get introduced to continuous improvement?
I first got introduced when I was getting my MBA, but then shortly after I got my MBA, about a year later, AT&T was rolling out their Lean Six Sigma program, and I was in the second wave, and my VP at the time just thought I would be a really good addition to that program, so that's how I got started.
Yeah. And what was, I mean, what kind of drew you in? Because some people get introduced to it and it doesn't really resonate with them. What was your
What got me introduced into it was, yeah, there's a lot of different there's a few different reasons, but the main reason is the continuous improvement mindset. So it's not just going in and fixing processes, but it's also developing that mindset for the organization that you're working with to continuously improve as they move into the future. And then the other part of it was the data analysis. I hadn't worked in data analysis for a little while before that, but I always liked data analysis and statistics. So it just kind of the two just meshed really well together. So that's what got me in.
and for the audience, Lauren and I first, I think we really got introduced through a LinkedIn group that I had set up here at the beginning of
Yes.
the pandemic work from home era of consultants who are stuck at home. So you've been in that mode for a little while as well, right?
Yes, I have been. Yes.
Yeah.
It's been
What
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, have are there certain adaptations that you've made if you've been able to support people remotely in different ways? Or
Yeah. So I've done remote work in the past, but now it's going to become an even bigger thing. One of the things I've had to do was switch around how I network and meet with people. So one of the things that was interesting was trying to figure out how do you network online,
Hmm.
um, and make an attempt to do it, and it's starting to turn out really well. And so I've been doing what's called 100 lunches or 100 meeting 100 different new people, and that's one way of I decided to challenge myself to network and meet new people. And then as far as consulting or coaching online, coaching is very easy to do online. If you're doing continuous improvement, you can work with that business owner or business leader over the phone. But then when it comes to consulting and morning workshops, it's a little bit different than doing it online. So um, I've been trying to help businesses or speak with them to understand what are their needs for right now, and then provide some a guidance that way
Yeah,
until we can start getting back face to face. But I still think that even it's gonna be a while before a lot of face to face is gonna happen.
yeah, yeah. I agree. There's a lot to figure out for us.
Yeah.
Our clients or organizations out there are trying to figure out what this new way of working is. If it's temporary, if it's a new normal, or there's certainly new challenges in addition to the challenges organizations already.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of big challenges.
Um, so we're going to focus today. Usually the podcast focuses very heavily on the lean methodology, but you have backgrounds with Lean Six Sigma, and we have an opportunity to learn about what organizations are also doing. We're going to introduce might be some new acronyms, or I've heard these acronyms and don't really know much. So we talk you talk about AI and RPA. I think maybe those go hand in hand, but Lauren, I'll let you have the floor since you have some
Yeah.
knowledge to share with us.
So yeah, AI is artificial intelligence. So think of your Alexa, think of Siri on your phone. We use AI every day, and then RPA is robotic process automation, which is a part of AI. So if you also think about, there's also a component called machine learning, or any type of automation. That's all going to be encompassed into artificial intelligence. And a lot of times people just think of artificial intelligence or the robots in a warehouse. So think of Amazon, having the robots do the picking and picking the items off the shelf and then putting them into boxes. That's going to be your typical robot. But a lot of times when it comes to artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's going to be software based, and that works really hand in hand with any type of the service industries. When I worked at Nielsen, we used a lot of automation to, instead of a human doing a manual task over and over again, like, so think of a standardized task over and over again. Once we were able to standardize the task, we just then put a robot into place, and it runs the scripts and it does all the automation for you. And then as it starts to learn that automation really well, then you can introduce machine learning where eventually learns a little bit more about that task, and it evolves. And that's kind of where the RPA comes into play as well.
And so just to make sure I'm on the same page, RPA, when you talk about robotic, it's software robotics.
It's
It's
software robotics.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And so different business processes. Like what are some examples of some electronic processes that could be automated in this RPA?
Oh yeah. So one of them is taking a good example I worked with a past client was taking data that they had coming in from their clients and then putting it into a database. So when we first started looking at that process to improve it, we standardized, the template that the clients use to send the data in, and then we standardized how the person would take it from the Excel spreadsheet or the template and putting into the database. So once that was all standardized and it was always repeatable, then what we did is we took that manual task and we set up a robot to basically go and do that. So basically, when you're looking at a screen, you could see the robot running in the background doing all of that for you with while you can go do some other work. So it's just basically like taking an Excel spreadsheet, the data, and then putting it into a database. That's something very simple. Um, Another one is knowing that I had another client that I worked with that they wanted to improve their onboarding for their clients. So their onboarding process was pretty bad. One of the things we did there is there's two things that we did there where we created a standardized template to be used at the beginning of the process, and then it was used throughout the entire process. But we you could put poke yoke or error proofing right into that template, and that's where some of the smart automation comes in the background. So if you choose one option, then your next options underneath are going to be predetermined based on your first selection. So that's just like some simple things that happened there. Another thing is if you have predictive analysis that you want to do for a client. So I saw this. We did this at Nielsen, where we did some predictive analysis for a client that wanted to see sales from one area of the United States. So we started the robot started collecting the data automatically by itself. Once you programmed it, and then it was able to do some predictive analysis. It's some simple statistics, but it had algorithms built into its robot processes to come up with that predictive analysis. So you didn't have to have someone sitting there doing that, so they could do some more advanced work.
And so when organizations are looking to automate a process like this, do some large organizations have an in-house team, or are they working with outside vendors typically to set this up?
It's probably going to be both. So, if it's a bigger organization, they're most likely going to have, especially if they're just starting out on their program, they're going to have some vendors come in, because there's some vendors that do have some products where you can just drop and put it in. But one of the things I'm finding is that sometimes those standard products need to be um, need to be set up specifically for the client. So while you might have something standard, it still needs to be some customization there. So it's going to be, I've seen it both where they just use the vendor and drop it in. I've seen it where I have another consulting firm that I was working with. They're big on setting up a lot of the RPA and machine learning, and working with them to make sure the processes were right. And then they were specifically building the robots
Mhm.
in automation specifically for the client. So it really depends on the client and the needs. So it's like I said, it's a combination of both. Where I've seen it in house, where all completely in house, or they're using vendors, or they're using completely outside help.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, to try to make connections between lean principles and lean practice with some of these technologies. When you're talking about standardizing and automating or making a routine out of a process, to me, that sounds like standard work. And
Right.
then the machine learning piece, if I hear you right, machine learning seems like a form of continuous improvement where the algorithms and the
Yeah.
software are not just following the same algorithm over and over again, they're improving the algorithm. Is that fair to
Yeah,
say?
that's exactly it. So the machine is learning for that specific part of the process. They are continually learning and continuously improving. So that's one of the things I think sometimes people or cultures get really scared of using machines or using the process Lean Six Sigma with it. I think the two go hand in hand because um, machine learning and AI is just another form of continuous improvement. It will make our lives better, but make our work a lot better for us.
Well, I mean, I could see an argument to be made for eliminating work that's sort of drudgery, really
Yes,
highly repetitive work, and like to me, a lean organization that's embracing these technologies, you would maybe follow the example of Toyota, where we're not looking to replace humans with
exactly.
technology, but the work that is done by people may shift. Um, we
Exactly.
we would be committed to those people and not lay them off because of automation, but invest in them. They may get upskilled in some way to where now they're doing more creative work, where the more routine work is left to the automation.
That's exactly how I like to approach it. So whenever I go in and start talking to a client, I usually say we're not going to think about replacing the workforce. It's more of we're doing a shift so that your workforce can do what they really need to be doing. A good example of that is I was working with another client where they had launched a new product, but the product never left product leadership or product marketing. It never moved into operations. Once you moved it into operations, the people in product leadership and development were able to start focusing on what they're supposed to be doing. So it's basically, if you think about it, putting the work in the right place. So that's another, lean. The way I think about lean thinking is putting the work in the right place and really developing your people and developing your culture.
Mhm. And one other connection that you mentioned was, of course, the idea of poka-yoke or
Yeah,
mistake proofing. Um, Having that mindset of whoever's designing the automation has got to think how to build in, or maybe it's just by the nature of robotic automation being very very consistent. Hopefully, that is eliminating some sources of error. And I think if we're asking people to do very highly repetitive work, it's just natural that error would creep in, just
yes.
due to our limitations in terms of focus and attention. It's recognizing human nature, not blaming people for their
Exactly.
mistakes. I think there's a fine line there.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think like I saw yesterday on LinkedIn someone another uh continuous improvement coach or and consultant put out that if we could do work right the first time instead of doing rework, so that's where, like you said, the human nature. So like that's like like building out databases. And, Nielsen's all big about building out databases and and doing predictive analysis for their clients. And that's one of the things within that corporation, by getting rid of that repetitive task, taking that away from the human to allow them to really concentrate on the job. And by building out those databases and letting the machine do it, it took out that human error. it really did. And so when you do work right the first time, that takes out all of your rework,
Mhm.
and which then cuts down on cycle time and cuts down on defects.
Yeah, yeah. So, what are your thoughts, or what are you seeing, in the context here of the current pandemic, changing where and how people are working? There are the economic challenges associated with the pandemic. Are there any trends that you see related to AI, RPA, machine learning within organizations and processes?
Yeah, I'm seeing a big push or a big talk about let's do this now instead of later. So that digital transformation of all the organizations was always on the radar, but I think we're going to start seeing it, especially toward the end of the year and early into next year, happening a lot faster because we don't like with the pandemic we are trying to have more people work remotely, or we want to lessen how many people are in the office, and that's where some of the times the technology does help. But I like to caution all businesses and organizations not while you need to move fast, you can there is a point where you are moving too fast. So if your process is really not that great, if it's just terrible, your all the technology is going to do is going to show you how bad that process is. Um, I think there was a quote by Edward Deming that says, "Was it a bad system will beat a person every time? If you take
Right.
out the person and put a bad system will be the AI every time." It's the same. It's the same exact concept here. So one of the things that I always caution organizations that just want to throw the new shiny tools at the process, I always ask, is your process repeatable? Is it the same time every time someone does it? Do you have a lot of defects? Are you having a lot of reworks? And if I get yes to a lot of defects and a lot of reworks, and I said, first you just need to look at the process first, get that perfect as perfect as you can, and then implement the technology.
Yeah, and to me, that's very familiar lean thinking. This idea of don't automate a broken process, I think is
Exactly.
true in manufacturing settings. There are certain healthcare settings, for example, hospital laboratories, where there had been, unfortunately, going back 15 or more years ago, labs would automate a bad layout. And
Right.
so instead of changing the layout in a way that would reduce the need for conveyors and automation and track systems. So they're with when they're automating bad process, they're layering cost and sometimes adding time on
Very,
top of what was already happening. So
very, very true.
great lesson there. Whether it's an electronic process, I can think of example of, let's say, filling out paperwork for a doctor's office, or my wife and I are in the context of where we're in the middle of a relocation. So my gosh, the paperwork. So I think of business
Yes.
processes; these are good problems to have, but related to mortgages and home buying, and you know filling out the same information on multiple pieces of paper. If that's converted to PDFs, now I'm typing in the same information into multiple documents or multiple pages of a document. That's not a great technological leap.
It's
Um,
not. It,
if the PDF doesn't have enough space to fill in your email address, the field just isn't wide enough on the document. That's no better than a paper form that doesn't have enough space. So there are still, it seems like, questions of design and waste elimination that need to go into any sort of automated or technology enhanced process.
there is very much so. I mean, like I said, I did see an organization last year that started to implement the AI and technology way too fast, and they took the most complex process. What you're describing is is in my mind is a simpler process, and that's where you usually start with filling out those forms. So if you're filling out your name on 5 or 6 different forms, why can't you just fill it out on one form and then it be populated across all the databases? There's
Right.
no reason why that can't be done. The same with doctor offices. I know, I've been to the doctors a couple of times since all of this started, and they're asking you the same questions over and over again. Now I get that we need to that they're going to have to take your temperature every time. But to ask you the same questions over and over again, maybe if we could do that online before you can get into the office, would save the nurse's time, the customer's time. Just yeah, just simple things, just that can be implemented just with the help, with some
Yeah.
help.
Well, so there's a lot of that transformation taking place in healthcare right now. As you were talking about some of these technologies being accelerated, I think the same is true in healthcare when it comes to your smartphone app to
Yes,
go, to check in online and fill out, answer some of those questions and some of that information from the relative safety of your home or from the parking lot.
exactly.
There are I know of examples where they're not just like, well, they're rethinking patient flow in ways that might just be good practice moving forward, where if you're in an
Yes,
environment where patients are arriving by car. Now we have to be careful about exceptions if someone's being dropped off or
right.
arriving via Uber or public transportation. But there are some settings where there's an opportunity to rethink and to use technology where a patient can check in from their car and
Right.
stay in the safety, secluded environment of their car until they're ready to be brought back to an exam room, and they can get a message. It might be automated that says, "We're ready for you now. Please come inside. Use hand sanitizer at the door, and immediately go back to room 8."
Exactly, exactly. And I think this is the time where I think businesses can develop these good processes. So it's not just for the safety. It's not just for safety, but I think overall, when it comes down to customer satisfaction, I think this is a really good time for us to take that to take a really hard look at some of those processes because we're gonna have to develop some new ones or develop a new way we start and then add that onto the old processes. So if we can make that as seamless as possible, I think overall the customers are happy, your employees will be happier, and then at the end of the day, even though we're all concerned about safety and we are concerned about our customers, at the end of the day, we also want to make sure that we're still hitting those revenue targets. Because if we don't hit those revenue targets, then we don't really have a business at that point.
Yeah, and I think classic lean thinking allows us to try to break down some
Yeah,
of these things that might have been seen as trade-offs before. We can do things in a safe, high quality way that is also low cost or good for the
exactly,
bottom line. And I
exactly.
think automating a bad process is not the path
Yeah, that's
um,
very true.
to that
That's very true.
success in different dimensions. So, I want to explore a little bit, like the risks. So, I use the example of automating a bad process in a laboratory. I think there are times where a technology is appealing, if not trendy, and there's that trap of jumping to a solution
Right.
or throwing technology at a problem. So, like, to me, within the context of lean, good A3 problem solving would lead us to, if somebody says, well, oh, I hear RPA is trendy. I want to form a team. Let's go implement RPA. I would try to call timeout and say, wait a minute, let's go back and define clearly what is the problem, what is the business need, what is the current state, and before jumping to the conclusion that a certain technology is the solution. And so I see you smiling. I think you're recognizing that thought process. Of course, could you elaborate on how you might help guide somebody through avoiding jumping to a technology solution?
Yeah, so if I have a client that wants to do that, my first question is what's the goal that you're trying to achieve?
Right.
And so based on that goal, then they'll let me ask some questions. So for example, I had a prospective client that I'm still working. Things are put on hold, so we're still working through it a little bit. Understand. I said, what's the goal of implementing the technology or the AI? And they said they want to save cost and but also increase revenue because they think their throughput would be a lot faster. Okay, that's a really good answer. So my next question I always ask is, what processes do you have in place? Are your processes standard? Are you what are what is the number of defects you have? What's your cycle time? And so a lot of times I'll start to ask those very basic questions. I mean, it's just some of the basic things we ask when we start working with a client who wants to improve their processes. Once I start to ask those kind of questions, if they don't know those answers, then I said, okay, let's time out. Let's get the answer to those questions, because then that way we can figure out, make sure that your goal is still on target, and that'll help us have our point A, right? Where are we starting? And then where we're going to end. That'll help us understand how far we really need to go. And then once we start, and then of course you go do a Gemba walk, do a Kaizen event, and understand what are the processes, understand what's the root cause do some root cause analysis, look at the data, and then come up with improvements. I always look at technology is going to be the last part of that improvement state, or those improvement stages. So usually we fix the process, make sure we have standard work, we have the training there, people are in the right place, and then we start looking at the technology, and that's where we start doing just basic automation, then RPA, and then you add in the element of machine learning after that. So it's just a cycle of continuous improvement.
Mhm.
And so I think if we take that time to do all of that work like that, I think at the end of the day, it's not as fast as someone might want to go, but it'll be faster than just throwing the technology and finding out that things are really broken.
Yeah, so there's kind of the old, it's sort of a lean cliche of go slow to go fast,
Right. Yes.
where it's better to, what I hear you saying is it's better to really be rigorous and make sure that we're setting up for the right solution rather than rushing into the right solution too quickly, and then people get stubborn, and this is where psychology and human nature gets in the way of continuous improvement, where in a lot of organizations people don't want to admit that they made a mistake.
You're right.
Sometimes, like going back to the physical automation of laboratory processes, it might have been a previous lab director who put in the automation. Well, now the new director has the opportunity maybe to take it
Y-
out,
Yeah.
because they're not so they're not personally invested in rationalizing the past decision instead of really honestly evaluating. But to me, it's that rigorous process, like you were laying out, of understanding the need and the current state and looking at alternatives that helps prevent technology mistakes.
Exactly. And then we are talking about the human nature that I always like to also add on when I'm speaking to clients too is how on board is everybody in the organization? So not just the director or the VP, is the president or the CEO really, and the business owner really on board with this? And then what about the employees? Employees are actually doing the work. If you don't have that buy-in at all levels, it's you're not that can one continuous improvement's not gonna is not always gonna work. It's just for the example that you brought up. But then if your employees who are doing the work don't want to do that, then it's going to fail because they're not going to do it. They're going to continue to do it in the old ways. So it's a continuous. I think with continuous improvement is change management, but then also learning. So it's an element at all levels in an organization
Yeah,
to look at.
yeah. So other than sort of the technology aspect of machine learning and the opportunity for improvement and some of this automation, how do you talk about concerns where somebody might say, well, okay, we could automate today's process, but then is there a risk that we become too rigid
Yes.
in,
Yes.
afterwards? How would you talk through that kind of concern?
Yeah, so with rigidness, so a lot of times I have seen in the past where an organization has become too lean because they've completely leaned out the process, right? Lack of a better term, and then they implemented the technology. But say there's a shift in the marketplace, or a shift in product development, or a shift in what the customers want. Because if you think about a Kano model, right, that those the needs of the customer is always changing. But then if you put in the market demands and the market shifts, what happens there is that when you become too rigid, you're not able to change fast enough. So that's where it's a balancing system, I would say. Yes, you need to have as perfect as possible, but then you also need to be able to change with the times and be a little bit fluid there. So it's
Mhm.
a balancing act, and I've seen organizations that have been able to do it very well. And if they can do that, and then it just also evolves into product lifecycle management. if you're able to balance that as perfect as you can, because sometimes you just never know what's going to happen. Like COVID-19 just kind of it really just hit us pretty fast,
Right.
and things change pretty fast. And so the businesses I think that did really well are were able to balance that. Some of the ones that were hurting weren't balancing things very well.
Yeah, and that word balance is a word I use a lot. I think due to the influence of my mentors. But yeah, and so during this COVID crisis, the first wave was manufacturers that were affected by
Yeah.
shutdowns in China, and there were articles about supply chains being quote unquote too lean. I'm like, well, they might not have had enough inventory,
Right.
but you could also argue then, like, well, how lean was it to have supply chains that were spread completely
Exactly.
around the world? That so or if people equate lean with standardization, and so well, we were too standardized. Like there are always these judgment calls. I think that leaders have to make. How do we find the right balance between yeah, this ideal might be perfect one piece flow, just in time, zero inventory.
Right.
Um, but in reality, in the short term, there might be a need for balance of having some level of buffer, but not so much buffer that the organization never feels pressured to improve and reduce downtime and improve the reliability within the organization. So um, yeah, it's just it's kind of making me think about, like, to me, lean is adaptability and continuous improvement.
It
I don't think we
is.
can have too much of that.
Exactly, exactly. And I think if we look at the true meaning of what lean is and how it started, right? That it was adaptability. It was developing our people. It was okay. Yes, we have machines, but then we still have people. How do we get the two to work together? And then, like you said, the just in time. I had a conversation with a gentleman here in Atlanta about the supply chain because Atlanta is a big supply chain area, and they were talking about how lean doesn't work in this type of situation. I'm like, yes, it does if you balance it right.
Yeah. Or if lean is about developing people and continuously improving and
Yeah,
engaging people, that applies in every setting.
exactly, exactly. Big time.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, traditionally, I think when we're talking about physical robots, the one knock on physical robots, or Elon Musk maybe has learned a lesson where he was really trying to heavily automate Model 3 assembly. And as he learned a little bit down the road, he kind of famously said, he probably tweeted this: humans are underrated,
You
because there
are.
were lessons learned about trying to automate jobs that were really, really difficult to automate and could be done safely and higher quality by people. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's this balance, and making sure, maybe he fell into that trap of falling in love with technology and wanted to automate because it's cool, or maybe
Right.
he thought, well, I mean, ideally it would be better for the business, but the challenge is getting from here to whatever you define as ideal. Like, to me, I would never define ideal as getting all of the people out of the process and fully automating everything, but each leader is going to make their own judgment call about their business and where they think the balance might be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, the balance is in it with the people and with and then adding the machines on top of that. Um, a lot of times, like that's why I was talking about the culture earlier and the people. If not everyone's on board, because to be honest, a lot of times your best ideas are coming from the people that are doing the work. And if they say, if I could just have something that would just do this for me, that's an indication to me, oh wait, that can be automated.
Yeah,
It's something that's manual, it's boring. They'd rather be doing something else, another part of the job. And that's why it was when we in the past when we were reducing cycle time without any of that in technology. And I remember leaders asked me, well, if I reduce the cycle time, what are my people going to be doing? I'm like, your people going to be doing a lot more work than you really realize. They're just, instead of having overtime, they maybe are able to work a standard, nice, normal 8-hour day. And then they get to go spend time with their family. That makes them happy. So that's the soft skills that some leaders need to take a look at as well. When
yeah.
we're
Well, it's
putting the
that
two
opportunity to
together.
talk. There's that opportunity to talk about what's in it for me as
Right.
individuals, and like you talk about, not working overtime. One of the chief complaints from physicians is technology, electronic medical records, in some instances making their job harder, or at least expanding the amount of time that it takes. Where I think there are complaints saying, well, some who works for who? It's almost like the doctor is working for the EMR as opposed to the EMR being
Yeah,
there for the benefit of the physician, which I think points to an opportunity to improve those technologies. How much of it was making a bad process electronic, and how much of it now is like looking at value versus waste. Just because things can be documented, and the doctors or providers feel now, or they are now required to enter certain information into the record, is that information really necessary or adding value? These are some of the debates and discussions people are having with technology in healthcare. Sometimes the technology and automation are not necessarily one and the same, I think, is the point I was trying to
yeah. And that point you brought up about the necessary information, I think it's like that. It's not just in healthcare. I think it's in a lot of different industries. Whereas the way we used to do it, we used to just always collect it. Do you really need to collect it going forward? And I think that goes hand in hand. Like if we could do an online check-in, just ask for the necessary information.
yeah.
Get in, get out. It's something that
And there's
people
there's
like
that
to do.
opportunity to challenge the way we've always done it. Let's
Yeah.
just not automate the way we've always done it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Definitely some good
Exactly.
lessons there. Do you have any other examples? We've talked about some of the risks or the downsides, but any success stories related to the combination of Lean and Six Sigma and some of these technologies?
Yeah, so I worked with I got a really good one. I worked with a organization to help with their talent acquisition process. It's a big one I always like to talk about.
Mhm.
Success there is it was taking anywhere from I think 5 to almost 3 weeks to post a job on a job board, like on their website or even on LinkedIn. So they were losing their ideal client pool. So we fixed the processes and then added in different types of automation and different types of RPA throughout the process. Um, and once we did that, I mean, it took about a good 3 to 4 months to do all of that. So by the end of doing all that implementation, we were able to bring that whole process down, the cycle time down from say 3 weeks down to 2 days.
Wow.
So, yeah, especially, but, at that point, the client pool was going pretty fast, and I would like to see hoping that continues to go that way. In addition to that, they didn't have to hire any additional workforce, so they didn't have to hire any additional recruiters, didn't have to hire any additional people to maybe do some manual data input. And then in addition to that, they were able to reposition some of the recruiters to do what they were hired to do to recruit instead of fighting fires between the system and the managers. There was also transparency between throughout the entire process. So there's some automated emails that were sent that this is where everything goes on along the way. In addition to, I know some HR folks would love this. They would send automated emails to the potential employee where they were at in the phase of the hiring process, because I know that's usually a big black hole for a lot of people.
Right.
And then in addition, they were able to save around, I think, the first 3 months, I think it was around $500,000 in savings. And then if you add, and then a year later, it was probably close to 1.5 million.
Mm.
Some really good success story there. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you for sharing that. And as as we wrap up, there's an opportunity for you, Lauren, to tell the audience about your consulting practice, Lauren Hisey Consulting, and a little bit more about the types of organizations that you work with, and how people can reach out to you if they're interested in talking about these things with you.
Yeah. I do coaching and consulting with business leaders and our business owners. Usually, I have worked in bigger corporations, and that's I have done some of those. I also have worked I also do work with small and medium businesses. So, I'm usually more on the service side of the business, service businesses versus manufacturing.
Mhm.
In addition to I worked in operations and I also worked in the sales area. So trying to make sure there's a good linkage between those two. So that's usually who I work with. And how to contact me, you can find me on LinkedIn or just visit my website, laurenhiseyconsulting.com. And there's a contact me there option as well.
So we'll make sure that link is in the show notes, and make sure people, laurenhiseyconsulting.com. And then also on LinkedIn, you're probably the only Lauren Hisey there.
I believe so.
Okay, it's good when
Okay, fun.
you've got a unique enough name. Mark Graban is in that same category if people can spell it right.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Hisey,
Yes.
Lauren Hisey. So, Lauren, thank you for being a guest and sort of kind of pushing or, some of our boundaries maybe about thinking about technology. I think sometimes people get hung up on the idea that technology is bad, but I think it's all because I think there's this traditional. I, even outdated thinking in ways where some people say, look, oh, look at Toyota, and Toyota uses technology
Exactly.
in different ways, and I think we can combine technology in a way that is supportive of people, respective of people, and engaging. If you look at the Toyota, I'm sorry, I'm climbing on the soapbox here. I didn't mean to. Yeah, I did. But if you look at the Toyota Way principles, when they talk about using proven, tested technologies that support your people and your process, it seems like that would apply to AI, RPA, machine learning, any of these technologies. So maybe I'll give you the last word on that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think people don't need to be so scared of it. I think of it as this way. It makes lives better. It'll make your work life better. And if you're working crazy hours right now in a job, it could actually make your life a little bit better, a little bit easier. So you can get out of work a lot easier, a lot faster. Go spend time with family. That's always been my end game. Telling people you can spend time with with your family, and then that lights them up.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. So, Lauren, thank you again for being here, and certainly wish you all the best.
All right, thanks for having me, Mark.
Sure thing.